Hello everybody, I'm Gwen Campbell-Mindes. Welcome to Gwen's Bookish Ramblings. So, as you can see here, this says that it's Book 5 in the Chronicles of Narnia. This is The Horse and His Boy. As I did last week, we're going to show the cover of the edition that I actually physically read, just so that you see the cover. And this is the cover of the book that I grew up reading that I don't use for physical reading anymore because it is very old. Actually not this specific paperback, but the collection of 7 as a whole that are from this particular Puffin set, they're starting to get really, really, really worn and dangerous to read. So, it is what it is. But Book 5, the interesting thing about the Chronicles of Narnia is that you can read them in chronological order, in which case you're starting with a book that was definitively not written first. You can read it in order of publication, in which case this is Book 5, or you can read it in the order in which I intend to approach it, which is kind of a personal idiosyncratic one. There's a certain degree of chronologic stuff going on in this, but I believe in starting with The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, because that is the book that sets the basis for this functional reality. That's the book that sort of starts everything and goes off. I believe in following up with The Horse and His Boy because, having just read Lion, Witch, and Wardrobe, this book takes place effectively during that. You get to the final chapter of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and Peter, Susan, Edmund, and Lucy get crowned the kings and queens of Narnia. And then they have a certain number of years which are never wholly defined in the books. Frankly, in my head, they were probably more years than are implied in, for example, the most recent set of movies that came out in 2000 and something. But in any event, there's a certain number of years that they were kings and queens, and this book takes place during that period, which is effectively the last chapter of Lion, Witch, and Wardrobe. So, The Horse and His Boy tells the story, and one of the things that this book does is it expands the geography of the universe in which Narnia exists, because we call it the Narnia series. But in point of fact, this book takes place predominantly in the Campbell-Mindes Empire, or possibly Campbell-Mindes, in the Campbell-Mindes Empire, and partly Archenland, with a brief glimmering stint through sort of that southern edge of Narnia, mostly just because Shasta takes a wrong turn on a road. But it doesn't actually really take place in Narnia. Likewise, the Dawn Treader, which takes place a couple of books along from now, is entirely not in Narnia. It is entirely on the ocean, traipsing through a series of islands very, very far to the east of Narnia. And the second to last book in the series, The Silver Chair, takes place far north of Narnia, well outside of that country. And so, while you can talk about Narnia and call it the Narnia series, the fact is that it's not always taking place in there. And indeed, the next book in the series after this one, The Magician's Nephew, also predominantly takes place outside of Narnia. It winds up in Narnia, but mostly isn't in there. So, The Horse and His Boy starts south in the Campbell-Mindes Empire. The Campbell-Mindes Empire is very, very Arabia-inspired. I'm not going to say Middle Eastern. It's inspired very much out of the Arabian Nights. It's inspired out of more the myth and fantasy of Middle Eastern cultures, of Arab cultures, than it is out of anything genuinely real. You need to think more Aladdin and less Saudi Arabia or Iran, Iraq, Jordan, or Egypt. So we have here Shasta, and the two horses are talking horses, both from Narnia, because Narnia is a land which has talking animals. And so Bree, whose full name is actually properly Bree Brinny Hinny Hui Ha, I believe it was. And Shasta decides that that's perhaps a little bit more than necessary, and can I just call you Bree? So, rather than Breehy Hinny Brinny Hui Ha, which, it's supposed to invoke horsey sounds. And the chestnut behind is Hwin the horse. Whatever her full name might be, we'll never know. And sitting on Hwin is Aravis, who is a native of Calormen. So Shasta has been raised as a poor fisherman's son. I copied the back of the book because there is a picture on the back of the book. This is the place where they were all supposed to meet when they come out the other side of Tashban, which is the capital city of Calormen, which they had to pass through on their way to cross the desert when they're on their way north towards Narnia. So here we have Shasta, and he was taken in by a fisherman when he was a baby, but he wasn't taken in by a kindly fisherman and raised as his son. He was taken in by a fisherman who said, "Call me father," but basically raised the boy to be 90% slave. This is from later in the book, so we'll get there in a moment. So Shasta, has tried all his youth to love his so-called father, when one day a Tarkan, which is basically kind of like a lord of Calormen, comes through and insists on staying the night because he's far enough away from anything and has been traveling alone and needs somewhere to stay. So he basically forces the fisherman to take him in for the night because, that's what wealthy lords do. And Shasta overhears him telling the fisherman, "Don't lie to me, that boy is not your son. He looks absolutely nothing like you. You are an Arab, and he looks like a Teutonic northerner." I mean, he doesn't put it that way, but, he says he looks like one of those northerners from the barbaric wilds of the north where demons pretend to be animals and talk to you. And Arshish says, well, yes, and tells the story of him finding a boat with a dead man in it and a baby, and how he took the baby in. And Shasta, upon hearing this, does the orphan thing and says, wait, if he's not my father, then my father could be anybody. He could be a prince or a king or a god. I don't know. This is amazing. And then he goes, and the Tarkan had a horse. Because, of course, he had a horse. He arrived on a horse. And Shasta starts talking to the horse, as one does when just talking to yourself, but having at least something to talk to. Only the horse talks back. And the horse says, yeah, my master is kind of a jerk. He doesn't treat me too badly, but that's because war horses are super expensive and he can't afford to treat me badly. But he'll probably treat you pretty badly. And so they both decide to run away. Bree, who is from Narnia with talking animals, says, I want to go home. I, was kidnapped as a foal and I want to go back. And he says, and you, kid, you look like you're from up north, so why don't we run away together? Because if you're with me, then I have a rider, and people are a little bit less likely to go chasing after a stolen horse or a runaway horse if the horse has a rider. I mean, yes, Shasta is basically a peasant riding on a blue-blooded war horse, so that's a little bit weird looking, but it's less weird looking than just, a war horse on the lam by himself. So they run away together, and along the way they have various adventures and meet up with Aravis. And Aravis is a Tarkina, a, Calorman lady, and she has been put into set up in an arranged marriage with the Grand Vizier, who is 50 years old and has a hump and is greedy and sniveling, and she really, really doesn't like him and doesn't want to marry a 50-year-old man with a hump. So she ran away. And the thing about this is it's so interesting because this is like one of the books that really, really, really does a lot of world building. Because there is a lot of world building that goes into Calormen. When you read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, there is world building there, but in a lot of ways it's England if the animals could talk, and there was a lion god. But here you have the real world building. You have complex description. You have this description of a culture, of names of roles, of what this unusual city is like, of the geography of the geography of everything, of Lasaraline Tarkina, who is one of Aravis's friends, Lasaraline being, sort of a very, very girly girl who just, likes pretty things and being married and going to parties and wearing nice dresses, whereas Aravis is somebody who really, really likes, riding and going on adventures and stuff. And so they're very, very contrasting, but, they've been friends in sort of because they traveled in the same circles. But you get the world building of the southern desert, that is the desert that lies between Archenland and that rests between Archenland and Calormen, and that is sort of one of the great barriers between the Calormen just sort of marching straight through in order to take over all of these lands to the north. And this is an image of Aravis and Bree and Hwyn and Shasta coming through after they crossed the desert because they had overheard about a shortcut, and they are trying to get ahead of Prince Rabadash, who is the Tees Rock. The Tees Rock is sort of the king, the Shah, or whatever you want to call him, of the Calormen Empire, whose name is always followed by the words, whose mention is always followed by the words, "May he live forever," at least among the Calormen, and the mighty Tees Rock, may he live forever. And so you have a lot more world building in this. You have this hermit who lives at the southern end of Archenland, and this is one of the dramatic scenes in this book, because my preferred version has a lot of illustrations in interesting ways. Is Aravis and the horses and Shasta being chased by Aslan, because he's trying to make sure that they get where they're going, because they have to get ahead to warn Archenland and King Lune of Archenland about this invasion. And there's a lot of other stuff I could say, but the best thing is the statement that Aravis also had many quarrels with Cor, but they always made it up again so that years later, when they were grown up, They were so used to quarreling and making it up again that they got married so as to go on doing it more conveniently. Which I think is a great way to close out the book, and that's everything, and I will see you all next week.